Friedrich Nietzsche is considered one of the world's most influential philosophers. He was, according to himself, the first psychologist. In many of his writings he deals with the human condition, suffering, joy, happiness, and despair. He excels particularly in the most important and faithful one, the affirmation of life. His own life was one of intense struggles, loneliness, and constant travels. But hidden in a valley in Switzerland was a place he returned to, year after year, to walk, to think, and to philosophize with a hammer.
Man does not strive for happiness, only the Englishman does that, the quote continues. Often misunderstood, frequently discussed, but always thought-provoking, Friedrich Nietzsche has always intrigued me, but not only his books, but also his life and restless travels across Europe. In recent years, his thoughts have resonated stronger than before. So in order to understand him better and to catch a glimpse of how he lived his life, I have decided to visit the place where he conceived some of his most important ideas, Sils-Maria in Switzerland.
My journey starts from Helsinki to Zurich. From there, I take the train, just like Nietzsche did on his travels. Nietzsche is an appealing read to many adolescents, myself included back in the days. And there are some who dismiss him because of this. I don't exactly know why. I also had a long pause, but returned to him after my burnout some years back, confused about who I was and struggling to find meaning. He guided me back to what I really always had liked doing, but maybe forgot in the midst of a career and life itself, which was reading, writing, and engaging in creative projects. In the words of Nietzsche himself, let the youthful soul look back on life with the question, what have you truly loved up to now? What has drawn your soul aloft? What has mastered it and at the same time blessed it?
Nietzsche himself traveled quite extensively by train, of course, across Southern Europe, in Italy and Central Europe. And there's this incident where he actually jumps on the wrong train. On my way to Sils-Maria, I accidentally jumped off too early and I had to take another train. Now I'm on the right train and heading for Sils-Maria again.
When traveling from Nice to Turin, Nietzsche boarded the wrong train, lost his luggage, and ended up in Genoa. Writing about the trip to his friend Franz Overbeck, he said, "It was perhaps the most unfortunate I have ever made. A deep weakness overcame me on the way, so I did everything wrong and stupidly." Fortunately, I did not end up in Genoa, and the next train took me to Sellerina, where I jumped on the bus to Sils-Maria. On my left is Lake Silvaplana, full of kite surfers. Finally, I arrive in Sils-Maria and start walking toward the Nietzsche-Haus. It is eerily quiet. The small village is nestled on the plain between Lake Silvaplana and Lake Sils, and the views surrounding are breathtaking. I follow the narrow road a couple of hundred meters, and there it is. The house reminds me of Magritte and his Empire of Light paintings. Not only does it resemble them, but on an abstract level it also encapsulates the contrast in Nietzsche's own life, the oppositions between light and darkness. Just like the paintings, the house also evokes a sense of isolation. For Nietzsche, something all too human and familiar. I step inside.
So now I've arrived, and it's split into two parts. This is going to be my room. So it's a fairly spacious room. Got 3 beds over there, and of course there's writing desk.
There are 5 rooms for rent in the house. I share the cellar with another person. The bedrooms are separate, but shower and kitchen are shared.
So it's time for my first night in Nietzsche-Haus. I woke up 4 o'clock Swiss time and flew from Helsinki, so it's been a long day for me. But one thing that struck me was that this city is incredibly quiet and tranquil. It's high season, but the streets are empty. Like everything is just empty. I understand why he came here, to philosophize with a hammer. And there was a touching point to Finland here in this book. He writes about the Engadines, this area. Here, where Italy and Finland have joined hands. How happy must he be who can say, "True, there are many grander and finer pieces of scenery, but this is so familiar and intimate to me, related by blood, nay, even more to me."
In 1881, Nietzsche did not only discover Sils-Maria, but also the musical piece to fill the void after his breakup with Wagner, Georges Bizet's Carmen. Shortly after leaving Sils-Maria for the first time, Nietzsche heard the opera in Genoa on the 27th of November. He was intoxicated by the natural and healthy passions of the French, in contrast to the forced and unhealthy Wagnerian ones, and exclaimed "Hurrah!" at this musical realization in a letter to Peter Gast. In the morning, I had to eat breakfast, where Nietzsche ate his.
I've come to the Hotel Edelweiss for my morning coffee, and this is where Nietzsche also had his meals. And in a letter to Carl von Gersdorff in end of June 1883, he writes, "There is no limit to the quiet, the altitude, the solitude I need around me in order to hear my most inner voices. I am fond of the people of Sils-Maria and I value them. I go to eat in the Hotel Edelweiss, an excellent inn, alone, of course, at a price that is more or less in line with my meager means. I have brought a large basket of books up here and I intend to stay for 3 months. Here, my muses live."
To investigate where his muses lived, I start walking towards Lake Silvaplana, one of the 2 lakes in Sils-Maria.
Before my trip, I bought this Stetson hat in a kind of Hermann Hesse moment. I think he wore these when you were traveling about. More like a poor man's Hermann Hesse.
After walking for a while, I start seeing a well-known spot. It is the inspiration for one of Nietzsche's most wonderful, and for some, horrible idea. The one of eternal recurrence. In August 1881, it was penned on a sheet with a notation underneath, 6,000 feet above sea level and much higher than all human beings. That day I walked through the forest along the Lake Silvaplana. I stopped by an imposing pyramid-shaped rock not far from Surley. That is where the idea came to me. In The Gay Science, he elaborates.
Nietzsche wrote, "How, if some day or night a demon were to sneak after you into your loneliest loneliness and say to you, 'This life, as you now live it and have lived it, you will have to live once more and innumerable times more, and there will be nothing new in it. But every pain and every joy and every thought and sigh and everything immeasurably small or great in your life must return to you, all in the same succession and sequence. Even this spider, the moonlight behind the trees, and even this moment and I myself. The eternal hourglass of existence is turned over and over again, with you in it, a grain of dust. Would you not throw yourself down and gnash your teeth and curse the demon that spoke thus? Or did you once in your life experience a tremendous moment when you would have answered, 'You are a god, and never have I heard anything as godly'?"
Nietzsche continues. If this thought were to take possession of you, it would change you as you are, or perhaps crush you. The question in each and everything, do you want this once more and innumerable times more, would weigh upon your actions as the greatest stress. Or how well disposed would you have to become to yourself and to life to crave nothing more fervently than this ultimate eternal confirmation and seal?
So if you were to discover that every moment in your life, joys, pains and boredom, would recur over and over again in a sequence for all eternity, how would you react? Would you be pleased or crushed? Since Nietzsche's demons enters your life at your loneliest loneliness, you cannot look to external conventions, morals or religion. The answer is indeed a personal one. What gives you value? So only by being authentic to yourself, finding your way, and being responsible for taking that chosen path, you could possibly affirm your life. Only then will you be able to say, was that life? Well then, once more.
An increasing amount of people in the modern world spend time doing things they probably regret. Sitting in an office in front of a computer for 8 to 12 hours a day, working a job they dislike, chasing titles no one really cares about, all the while, knowingly or not, suppressing that inner voice out of fear. Ask yourself, is this a life you would live over and over again?
Depending on what work you do, if it's not aligned with the purpose you have in your life, you're probably gonna burn out and crash at some point. Because it's very hard to cram modern work life into some sort of meaningful mission. Nietzsche goes deep. He urges you to ask the question who you are and channel it towards something constructive and where you will find at least, maybe not happiness, but some sort of purpose. People are very disillusioned by the boredom of modern office life, especially. And Nietzsche, when he quit his professorship in Basel, he said, live dangerously.
The secret of realizing the greatest fruitfulness and the greatest enjoyment of existence is to live dangerously. Build your cities on the slopes of Vesuvius. Send your ships out into uncharted seas.
So now I'm back after a 6-7 hour walk along the Silva Plana. It's a routine which Nietzsche did as a part of his daily exercise. He writes that he walked or did daily exercise of 5 to 7 hours, and before that he wrote, and after that he wrote.
When I wake up in the morning, my time in the Nietzsche-Haus is over.
So after 2 nights, both with actually vivid nightmares, which was kind of fascinating, it's time to leave Nietzsche-Haus. I'm moving into the next door neighbor, the Hotel Edelweiss, where Nietzsche had his breakfasts. There were only 2 days available for this summer, so 2 days behind me, and let's move on.
For the final part of my visit, I will stay 1 night in the Edelweiss and 1 in the famous Waldhaus, an almost mythical hotel with guests ranging all the way from Thomas Mann, Hermann Hesse, Albert Einstein, Otto Klemperer, Richard Strauss to Luchino Visconti, whose Death in Venice is one of my absolute favorite movies. But despite leaving my room in the Nietzsche-Haus, I return for the museum, which is open for everyone.
The Nietzsche-Haus Museum gives a nice overview of Nietzsche's life, starting from the tragic death of his father in 1849, and then following his time in Schulpforta as a gifted student, ending up in Basel as a professor in philology. We can then follow his travels across Europe as a free spirit and the eventual breakdown of his mental illness in 1889 in Turin. We can see some of his notes from Will to Power, where he mixes his thoughts with something about a toothbrush. We can slowly see his downfall in his letters.
I stroll around in the quiet museum. Somehow it aligns with the nature of Nietzsche's travels and life in all of its modesty. Here, there is nothing unnecessary or lavish, just wood, glass, and substance. And of course, some good Nietzsche literature and postcards. On the upper floor is the room Nietzsche lived in for 7 summers. His light green room had a small bed, a rustic table, and a boot jack. There was barely room for his 104 kilograms of books. Despite his love for the beautiful village, Sils-Maria did not protect Nietzsche from illness. Over the years, the room witnessed Nietzsche's agonizing bouts of pain and vomiting. Already on his first trip in 1881, he wrote, "I am desperate. Pain is vanquishing my life and will. 5 times I have called for Dr. Death. But as with everything Nietzsche, there was another side to all of the pain. Thoughts have arisen, the like of which I have never seen before." In this room, he would write down some of his most potent ideas. At the end of his first stay, both Zarathustra and the eternal recurrence had been conceived. Much more were to follow.
It's hard to imagine the hellish pains Nietzsche went through in his life, starting from his father's death at age 4, followed by his brother's death at age 5. Throughout his life, he suffered of intense bouts of migraine, so intense that he vomited and lay bedridden for weeks. He wrote to his friend Paul Ree, "This neuralgia goes to work so thoroughly, so scientifically, that it literally probes me to find how much pain I can endure. And each of its investigations lasts for 30 hours. His life was one of sickness and pain, and you would think one would become cynical or even despondent. But how did Nietzsche react? He writes in Ecce Homo, "For one who is typically healthy, being sick can even be an energetic stimulant to life, to more life. Thus, in fact, does that long period of sickness seem to me now. I discovered life, as it were anew, myself included." He continues, "For pay heed to this. It was in the years of my lowest vitality that I ceased to be a pessimist. The instinct for self-recovery forbade me to a philosophy of indigence and discouragement." And then he talks about a human being who has turned out well, and he says, "What does not kill him makes him stronger."
A quote that most people are familiar with and which contains more than a little truth. Perhaps not applicable to the worst psychological traumas and ordeals, but in general a useful way of looking at life and finding meaning in one's suffering.
Personally, I don't think a deep meaning can be found without at least some suffering. Hiking up a mountain and then admiring the views and having a snack, having a little water will always be more pleasurable than taking the cable car up and then doing the same thing.
In the same way, writing a book with ChatGPT will never give you the same deep satisfaction that a creative struggle of writing a book actually would give you. Meaning requires that struggle and pain. They are different sides of the same coin.
But happiness and joy are also inextricably linked to suffering, something Nietzsche was well aware of. When we try to avoid the pain of discipline and engage in short-term pleasures, the result is often the opposite of what we are looking for.
I think we all know the feeling of passive scrolling. We end up feeling even worse. Striving for these short bursts of happiness doesn't work. And there's even a name for it. It's a phenomenon called the pleasure paradox. The more we try to grasp after that happiness by these small hits, the less we get it and the worse we feel.
Was Michelangelo happy twisting his neck and back painting the Sistine Chapel? Definitely not. We know that from his writings. Did it give him a sense of purpose and meaning? Most likely, yes. Personally, I try to choose suffering that I can live with, because whatever endeavors I am undertaking, I will suffer in some way. If I work in a modern office space, I will suffer. I will also suffer by doing things I want to do, such as creative projects, but probably less. Therefore, it's up to me to choose which kind of suffering feels worthwhile.
When in the beginning I quoted Nietzsche saying, "Man does not strive for happiness, only the Englishman does that," he was pointing his fingers toward the British utilitarianists such as John Stuart Mill and their focus on total happiness.
Nietzsche sneered at them for their philosophy of the greatest happiness for the greatest number and their focus on minimizing pain. How little you know of human happiness, you comfortable and benevolent people. For happiness and unhappiness are sisters and even twins that either grow up together or, as in your case, remain small together. Had Nietzsche studied Mill a bit further, he might not have been as harsh in his criticism. It wasn't as clear-cut as he would have it. Mill had actually claimed that it was better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Mill valued intellectual pursuits higher than so-called lower pleasures. In some sense, then, Mill was closer to Nietzsche than he, the hermit of Sils, might have realized.
Nietzsche was an avid walker, and he praised walking in many places in his books. And Ecce Homo, he writes, "Sit as little as possible and credit no thought not born in open air or whilst moving freely about."
On the opposite side of the village from Lake Silvaplana lies Lake Sils and the Chaste Peninsula. The wooded peninsula stretches out like a finger into Lake Sils. Nietzsche wrote to his sister that it was here that he thought up Zarathustra and once wanted to be buried, the most beautiful spot in the Engadines. If Silvaplana was beautiful, then Lake Sils is majestic. Its character entirely different. The calm turquoise water and the soft silence settle deep within me. My thoughts surface as I walk, just as Nietzsche remarked.
When you walk around Lake Sils in contrast to Lake Silvaplana, you notice there's a big difference in atmosphere. It's more quiet and calm. This is where Nietzsche wanted to be buried, but his sister didn't like that idea apparently. When you walk around here, you feel like you're a part of Caspar David Friedrich painting. Everything is sublime, big, calm, tranquil, and you're part of something majestic. It just calms your mind.
Maybe Nietzsche's life can be romanticized as a Friedrich painting, but his philosophy is closer to a mix of cubism with its multiplicity of perspectives and breaking with old forms, and expressionism with its anxiety and a sense of alienation. Seeing the opportunity, I also want to experience the lake on boat, just like Nietzsche, who was initiated to the art of rowing by his friend Meta von Salis. I jump on and cruise across, hoping to be remembered as grateful ballast. It is quite fascinating how these romantic landscapes in Sils-Maria can give rise to such explosive ideas. Ideas that shook the foundations of Western thought. Ideas that anticipated much of the horrors of the 20th century and its mass movements grasping for the shadows of the old world, formed and shaped right here, under the watchful gaze of the mountains, on the solemnity of Lake Sils and in the winds of Silvaplana. What were we supposed to do now that God was dead and we had killed him? Nietzsche's God is dead has been both misused and misunderstood. But what did he mean?
In The Gay Science, Nietzsche clarifies his stance. By God is dead, we should understand that the Christian God has become unworthy of belief.
Human beings need to accept this reality and start living truthfully. But it wouldn't be easy. Instead, there were other, paralyzing consequences for mankind. Nietzsche wrote, "What I relate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism." The idea that life has no intrinsic meaning or value. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he captures this feeling elegantly. Do we not dash on unceasingly, backwards, sideways, forwards, in all directions? Is there still an above and below? Do we not stray as through infinite nothingness? Does not empty space breathe upon us? Has it not become colder? Does not night come on continually, darker and darker? He predicted in the future we would see what he called the last man, a passive human living in a religion of comfortableness. The last man is not interested in painful pursuits for personal greatness, but is rather content lying under a comfy blanket in a cozy home, leading a life of disengaged, mundane mediocrity. Everything requires too much exertion. Everybody wants the same, everybody is the same.
But he also saw opportunities for free spirits and philosophers. Going back to Christianity was never an option.
Instead, this open sea should make our hearts overflow with gratitude, astonishment, presentiment, and expectation. And this leads us to one of the most difficult existential dilemmas: how to deal with the threat of nihilism that followed. Nietzsche already had an answer: the Übermensch, the overman. The overman is the opposite of the last man, who passively resigns from life. The overman, then, is the person who overcomes the debilitating force of nihilism, actively confronts it, and engages with life to the fullest, regardless of its purposelessness. It is not a reason for negatively evaluating life. As Nietzsche put it, man is something which must be overcome. Nietzsche's concept of Übermensch is thus one of self-overcoming.
I hope with this journey I have cleared the skies of some of the intellectual fog that surrounds Friedrich Nietzsche. Mainly, in my opinion, his optimistic views on life, and that it should be lived in a way so that you can become what you are.
But what is that? Aren't you already someone? Do you need to turn into someone else?
Many of us look for an essence inside ourselves, a true me. But as Nietzsche pointed out, if a hare has 7 skins, a man may skin himself 70 times 7 times without being able to say, "Now that is truly you, that is no longer your outside." What if becoming what you are is about finding your why? But then sometimes our why changes with time. We find a new one after trying something different or after a meaningful experience. Occasionally, we even find it by accident. So maybe it is more of an active process, to become but never arrive, just an ongoing transformation. And I guess that is what makes life interesting.
Maybe becoming what you are is a process of losing and finding yourself over and over again. Or in Nietzsche's words, in order to give birth to a dancing star, one must first have chaos within.